Derek had worked double shifts for years to afford the two-story colonial with a white picket fence. Monica kept the house immaculate, her real estate license bringing in decent money while she maintained her role as the perfect police wife. Jason excelled in school and showed promise in baseball, though lately he'd grown distant, spending more time locked in his room. Derek's reputation in the department was legendary. He'd never taken a bribe, never looked the other way, and never forgot when someone crossed him. 3 years ago, he'd testified against his own partner for skimming drug money. When Officer Gene Travis tried to intimidate him into silence, Derek had calmly documented every threat, every attempt at coercion, until Travis found himself behind bars. That was Derek's way. Methodical, patient, and absolutely merciless when justice needed serving. Sheriff Gabriel McFarland had always been different. Where Derek was rigid and uncompromising, Gabriel was charming and political. He'd climbed the ranks through connections and smooth talk, eventually winning the sheriff's election on promises of community policing and transparency. Derek had voted for him, respected him even, though they rarely socialized outside of work functions. Monica had been acting strange for months. Late nights at client meetings, new clothes, a secretive smile when she checked her phone. Derek noticed everything. It was his job, but he'd chosen to trust. Trust was becoming his greatest mistake. Jason had been asking odd questions lately. Dad, what would you do if someone betrayed you? And do you think people can change? Derek had dismissed it as teenage philosophy, but now those conversations felt loaded with meaning he'd missed. The morning of his world's end started like any other. Derek kissed Monica goodbye, ruffled Jason's hair, and headed to the station. He had no idea that by evening, everything he'd built would be ashes, and the man he'd trusted would be bleeding on his living room floor. Chapter 2. Cracks in Paradise. The first Real crack appeared on a Tuesday. Derek came home early from a surveillance that went sideways, hoping to surprise Monica with dinner. Instead, he found her on the phone in their bedroom, door closed, voice hushed and intimate. When he entered, she jumped like she'd been shot, quickly ending the call. Who was that? Derek asked, his detective instincts kicking in. Just Laurel Irwin from the office. Closing paperwork, Monica replied, but her tells were obvious to someone who'd interrogated criminals for 2 decades. The way she avoided eye contact, touched her neck, spoke a fraction too fast. Derek said nothing, but he started watching. Really watching. Monica's phone developed a passcode she'd never used before. She started volunteering for evening open houses that seemed to run unusually late. New lingerie appeared in her drawer, tags still on, never worn for him. She'd hum songs he didn't recognize and smile at private jokes she wouldn't share. 3 weeks later, Derek followed her. Professional surveillance training made it easy to stay undetected as Monica drove to the Riverside Motel on the wrong side of town. She sat in her car for 10 minutes before Gabriel McFarland's unmarked cruiser pulled up beside her. Derek watched through binoculars as his wife and his sheriff embraced in the parking lot. Not a friendly hug. A lover's embrace, desperate and familiar. They disappeared into room 247, and Derek sat in his car for 2 hours, something cold and terrible growing in his chest. When they emerged, disheveled and glowing, Derek made a decision that would define everything that followed. He wouldn't confront them. Not yet. He would document, investigate, and plan. Because Derek Kramer never acted in anger. He acted with purpose. The investigation consumed him. Hidden cameras, phone records, credit card statements. Monica and Gabriel had been conducting their affair for 8 months. Expensive hotels, weekend trips when she claimed to be visiting her sister, gifts charged to Gabriel's personal credit card. They'd been sloppy, confident that Detective Derek Kramer would never suspect his own wife. But the deeper Derek dug, the more he found. Gabriel wasn't just sleeping with Monica. He was pillar of corruption in the sheriff's department. Skimmed evidence, altered reports, deals with local drug dealers. And Monica wasn't just unfaithful. She was his accomplice, using her real estate connections to launder money through fake property deals. The betrayal went beyond infidelity. They'd made him a fool, used his reputation as cover for their crimes, and built their relationship on the foundation of everything he stood against. Jason knew. That became clear when Derek found him crying in the garage one afternoon, holding something behind his back. "They think I don't understand," Jason said, his voice cracking with adolescent rage. "They think I'm stupid. What do you know, son?" Jason pulled out his hand, revealing photos. Monica and Gabriel together, clearly intimate, clearly damning. "I've been following them too, Dad. I thought maybe I could stop it before you found out." Derek looked at his 17-year-old son, seeing himself reflected in the boy's eyes. The same sense of justice, the same inability to let betrayal slide. "We're going to handle this," Derek said quietly. "But we're going to do it right." He had no idea that Jason had already started handling it in his own way. Chapter 3. The Breaking Point. The plan was simple. Confront them together, demand Gabriel's resignation, and file for divorce. Clean, legal, devastating to their reputations, but manageable for everyone involved. Derek had compiled enough evidence to destroy Gabriel's career and ensure Monica got nothing in the divorce. It was measured revenge, the kind a rational man would pursue. But Jason had other ideas. On the night everything went sideways, Derek was supposed to be working a double shift. Instead, he'd finished early and decided to execute his plan. He wanted to catch them together, force the confrontation he'd been building toward for weeks. He arrived home to find Monica's car in the driveway, alongside Gabriel's cruiser. Perfect. Both targets in one location. But as Derek approached the house, he heard shouting from inside. Monica's voice, high and frightened, then Gabriel's deeper tones, aggressive and threatening. Something had gone wrong. Derek entered through the back door, moving with tactical precision through his own home. He found Monica unconscious on the living room floor, a small trickle of blood from her temple. Gabriel was standing over her, but his attention was fixed on something else. Jason stood in the hallway, Derek's service weapon steady in his hands, pointed directly at the sheriff's chest. "He hurt Mom," Jason said calmly when he saw his father enter. "So I hurt him back." Gabriel was bleeding from his shoulder, a through and through that had missed anything vital but left him weakened and desperate. His own weapon was kicked across the room, while out of reach. "This was your mother's idea," Gabriel gasped, seeing Derek enter. "You need to learn the truth." "Shut up," Jason said, his voice carrying a coldness that chilled Derek to the bone. "I knew you'd come home, Dad," Jason continued, never taking his eyes off Gabriel. "I've been planning this for weeks." That's when Derek realized his son hadn't stumbled into this situation. He'd orchestrated it. Just then it happened. The sound of sirens in the distance, growing closer. Multiple units, responding to reports of shots fired. Someone had called it in, but none of them had made that call. "Jason," Derek said carefully, "what did you do?" His son smiled, an expression that belonged on no 17-year-old's face. "I did what you taught me, Dad. I made sure the bad guys got caught." Gabriel tried to speak, blood foaming at his lips. "The boy, he called me, said Monica was ready to confess everything. Said she wanted to meet. When I got here, she tried to back out, said she'd change her mind. We fought and then I shot you," Jason finished matter-of-factly. "Self-defense, of course. You were attacking my unconscious mother with your weapon drawn. My father can testify to that." The sirens were getting closer. In minutes, the house would be swarming with cops, paramedics, investigators. The official story would be written in the next few minutes, and Jason had already decided what that story would be. Derek looked at his son, seeing a reflection that terrified him. Jason had inherited more than his sense of justice. He'd inherited his ruthlessness, his patience, and his inability to forgive betrayal. "The recording device is in Mom's purse," Jason said quietly. Everything Gabriel just said about their affair, about her being his accomplice. It's all documented now. Derek realized his son had played them all, lured Gabriel here with the promise of reconciliation, provoked the confrontation that knocked Monica unconscious, and created a scenario where shooting the sheriff would appear justified. The first patrol car pulled into the driveway, lights flashing. "Remember, Dad," Jason said, lowering the weapon as footsteps approached the front door. "He was attacking Mom when you arrived. I had no choice. As officers burst through the door, weapons drawn, Derek made the split-second decision that would define the rest of their lives. He backed his son's story, becoming complicit in a web of violence and deception that would make the affair seem like a minor indiscretion. But as Gabriel was loaded into an ambulance, barely clinging to life, he managed to grab Derek's shirt. "Your boy," he whispered. "He's not what you think. Monica found out. That's why she was ending it." Gabriel lost consciousness before he could finish, leaving Derek with questions that would haunt him and a son whose depths he was only beginning to fathom. Chapter 4. Aftermath and Revelations. The investigation moved swiftly, guided by Jason's carefully planted evidence and Derek's reputation. Sheriff Gabriel McFarland survived surgery, but remained in critical condition, sedated and unable to give his statement. Monica woke up with a concussion and convenient memory gaps about the events leading to the shooting. Detective Ian Reese, Derek's longtime colleague, led the investigation with the kind of thoroughness that made Derek nervous. Ian was honest, competent, and unfortunately perceptive. "The physical evidence supports your son's account," Ian said, reviewing his notes in the Kramer living room 3 days later. Gabriel's weapon was discharged once into the wall. Powder burns on Monica's clothes suggest close-range intimidation. Jason's shots were clean, defensive positioning. Derek nodded, maintaining the stoic expression that had served him well over the years. But internally, he was reconstructing the scene with new understanding. Jason hadn't fired in panic or self-defense. He'd fired with precision, placing his shots to wound, not kill. The boy had wanted Gabriel alive for a reason. "What bothers me," Ian continued, "is the timeline. The anonymous 911 call came in before the shooting, not after. Someone knew violence was going to occur." Monica, sitting across the room with an ice pack pressed to her head, looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "The call was placed at 8:47 p.m. Our forensics team estimates the shooting occurred between 8:52 and 8:55. Someone called for help before help was needed." Jason, who'd been quietly doing homework at the kitchen table throughout the interview, finally spoke. "Maybe it was a neighbor who heard the arguing earlier. People don't always report domestic disturbances immediately." Ian's eyes fixed on the teenager with new interest. "The call was placed from a burner phone, activated that morning and discarded afterward. Pretty sophisticated for a concerned neighbor." The room fell silent except for the ticking of Monica's antique clock. Derek felt the weight of unasked questions pressing down on them all. After Ian left, promising to follow up once Gabriel was conscious enough to give his statement, the family sat in their damaged living room, each lost in their own thoughts. "We need to talk," Monica said finally, her voice hoarse from crying. "No," Jason replied firmly. "We don't." Something in his tone made both parents look at him with fresh eyes. The boy they'd raised was gone, replaced by someone calculating and cold. "Jason," Derek began. "Dad, I saved us. Gabriel was going to destroy our family with his accusations. Mom made a mistake, but she was trying to fix it. I handled the situation. By shooting a man, by protecting my family." Jason's eyes were steady, unrepentant, just like he would have done. That evening, while Monica slept off her pain medication, Derek found himself in Jason's room. His son was reading a book on criminal psychology, making notes in the margins. "What did Gabriel mean?" Derek asked. "About you not being what I think." Jason looked up, considering his answer carefully. "Gabriel found out about my activities. He was going to use that information to control Mom, to force her to stay in the relationship." "What activities?" "I've been documenting corruption in the sheriff's department for months. Not just Gabriel, a whole network. Deputy Nathaniel Daniel has been selling confiscated drugs back to dealers. Sergeant Marty Graves has been taking bribes to alter traffic citations. Gabriel was just the biggest fish." Derek sat heavily on his son's bed. "Why didn't you come to me?" "Because you're too honest, Dad. You would have tried to handle it through proper channels, and they would have destroyed the evidence and transferred to other departments. Justice would have been delayed, maybe denied entirely. So you decided to take matters into your own hands. I learned from the best." Jason's smile was sharp. "You always said that bad people need to face consequences. I just made sure they would. Over the next several days, as Gabriel remained unconscious and the investigation continued, Derek began to see the scope of his son's planning. Anonymous tips had been sent to internal affairs about deputy misconduct. Financial records had been leaked to journalists. Search warrants were being executed across the county as Jason's months of intelligence gathering bore fruit. His 17-year-old son had orchestrated the downfall of an entire corrupt network, using Monica's affair as the catalyst and Gabriel's shooting as the final act. But there was something else, something Jason wasn't telling him. Derek could see it in the way his son watched Monica, in the careful distance he maintained from his mother. The affair had triggered Jason's investigation, but it wasn't the core of his anger. The truth would come out eventually. It always did. And when it did, Derek suspected that everything he thought he knew about his family would prove to be an illusion. Chapter 5. Deeper Betrayals. Gabriel McFarland woke up 5 days after the shooting, groggy but lucid enough to demand a lawyer before saying anything to investigators. His first coherent statement wasn't about the shooting. It was a request to speak privately with Detective Derek Kramer. Absolutely not, Ian Reese said when Derek relayed the message. You're a witness in this case, possibly a victim. Any communication needs to be documented and supervised. But Gabriel persisted, using his limited phone privileges to call Derek directly at home. Monica answered, her face going pale as she listened to whatever Gabriel was saying on the other end. He wants to make a deal, she told Derek after hanging up. He says he has information about Jason that we need to hear. Against his better judgment, Derek agreed to visit Gabriel in the hospital, with Ian present and everything recorded. What he heard in that sterile room would shatter his understanding of his son completely. Your boy's been blackmailing half the county for months, Gabriel began, his voice weak but urgent. Not for money, for compliance. He found out about Monica and me, but that was just the beginning. Gabriel explained that Jason had approached him 3 months ago with photographs, financial records, and documented evidence of corruption. But instead of reporting it, Jason had made a different offer: resign quietly and leave town, or have everything exposed in a way that would destroy not just Gabriel's career, but his family's financial security. He had leverage on everyone, Gabriel continued. Daniel's drug dealing, Graves' bribery, even Mayor Russ Rowe's tax evasion. But he wasn't interested in justice. He was building a network of control. Derek felt sick. That's impossible. Jason's 17 years old. Age doesn't matter when you have that kind of intelligence and absolutely no conscience, Gabriel replied. He told me he learned patience from you, attention to detail from his mother, and ruthlessness from studying criminal psychology. Ian was taking notes frantically, but Derek could barely process what he was hearing. Monica tried to end things with me because she found out what Jason was doing, Gabriel continued. She was scared of her own son. That's why I came to your house that night, to warn her that Jason had escalated his threats. The room spun as Derek processed this information. His son wasn't a boy who'd acted impulsively to protect his family. Jason was a calculating manipulator who'd orchestrated events to eliminate threats to his power structure. The shooting wasn't random, Gabriel said. He needed me discredited but alive, so his other victims would know what happened to people who didn't cooperate. Dead martyrs are harder to control than broken survivors. That evening, Derek confronted Jason directly, laying out Gabriel's accusations. His son listened patiently, occasionally nodding as if impressed by Gabriel's insight. Most of that is true, Jason said when Derek finished, though he's underestimating my motivations. Explain. I didn't start this for power, Dad. I started because I watched you work within a corrupt system for years, watching bad people escape consequences because they had connections or lawyers or just dumb luck. You always did the right thing, and it never seemed to matter. Jason stood and walked to his window, looking out at the neighborhood where he'd grown up. Do you know how many cases you've worked where the guilty walked free? How many victims never got justice because some judge threw out evidence on a technicality or some prosecutor cut a deal? Derek realized his son had been watching him, studying him, absorbing his frustrations, and channeling them into something dark. So you decided to become judge and jury yourself? I decided to create a system where bad actions have guaranteed consequences, Jason replied. Gabriel was cheating with Mom, stealing evidence, and taking bribes. In your system, he might have faced some administrative discipline, maybe early retirement with full pension. In my system, he gets shot and exposed, and everyone who worked with him knows that cooperation has better outcomes than resistance. And Monica? Jason's expression hardened. Mom facilitated Gabriel's corruption through her real estate connections. She also violated our family through adultery. But she's shown willingness to accept consequences and modify her behavior. Gabriel refused to cooperate. Derek stared at his son, seeing a stranger wearing a familiar face. You shot a man, Jason. You destroyed multiple lives. I prevented worse destruction by acting decisively, Jason replied calmly. And now everyone in this county knows that corruption carries real risks. Crime rates will drop, conviction rates will improve, and justice will be served more efficiently. That's not justice. That's terrorism. It's evolution, Dad. Your way wasn't working. Later that night, Derek found Monica in their bedroom, packing clothes into a suitcase. I can't stay here, she said without looking at him. Jason scares me. The way he looks at me, like he's deciding whether I'm still useful. He's our son. No, he's a stranger who happens to share our DNA. And he's not done yet. Gabriel was just the beginning. Monica was right. Over the following days, 3 more county officials quietly resigned, citing personal reasons. 2 local business owners suddenly became model citizens, paying back taxes and closing questionable operations. The anonymous tips kept flowing to state investigators, always perfectly timed and thoroughly documented. Jason was cleaning house, and everyone who'd ever bent the rules was scrambling to get ahead of his information network. But Derek was beginning to understand that his son's ultimate target wasn't Gabriel, or the corrupt officials, or even the criminals they protected. His ultimate target was Derek himself, the honest cop whose rigid morality had never been enough to fix a broken system. Jason was proving that his father's methods were obsolete, that fear and control could accomplish what justice and procedure had failed to achieve. The question was whether Derek would accept his son's worldview or become another obstacle to be eliminated. Chapter 6: The Price of Knowledge. 3 weeks after the shooting, the scope of Jason's operation became impossible to ignore. State investigators descended on the county like locusts, armed with evidence that could only have come from months of careful surveillance and document gathering. 12 officials were arrested, including 3 judges and the county prosecutor. Detective Ian Reese sat across from Derek in their usual booth at Murphy's Diner, looking exhausted and confused. Someone handed us the most comprehensive corruption investigation in state history, Ian said, stirring his coffee absently. Bank records, audio recordings, photographs, even copies of altered court documents. It's like they had access to everything. Derek pushed his untouched sandwich around his plate, knowing exactly who they were. The weird part is the timing, Ian continued. Most of this evidence was gathered before Gabriel was shot, but it's only surfacing now, like someone was waiting for the right moment to drop it all at once. Maybe they were building a case, wanted to make sure they had everything. Or maybe they were using it for leverage first, and only went public when they didn't need the leverage anymore. Ian's words hit too close to home. Derek excused himself early, claiming a family obligation, and drove home to find Jason calmly doing homework at the kitchen table while Monica cooked dinner. The picture of domestic normalcy would have been comforting if Derek hadn't known what lurked beneath it. We need to talk, Derek said to Jason. Can it wait until after dinner? I have a calculus test tomorrow. The casual response, somehow, made everything worse. His son was destroying lives and reforming local government while worrying about high school mathematics. After Monica went to bed, Derek confronted Jason in the garage, away from any recording devices his son might have planted in the house. The state investigation, Derek began. Impressive, isn't it? Turns out that when you actually have evidence of crimes, prosecutors are willing to act. You can't keep doing this. Jason looked up from the motorcycle engine he was rebuilding, his hands black with grease. Doing what exactly? Playing God, deciding who gets punished and how. I'm not playing anything, Dad. I'm just ensuring that actions have consequences. Isn't that what you always taught me? Not like this. Jason wiped his hands on a rag, considering his words carefully. Do you know what your conviction rate is for cases involving people with money or connections? 37%. Do you know what it is for poor defendants with public defenders? 84%. The statistics hit Derek like a physical blow because he knew they were accurate. Your system only works if you're powerless, Jason continued. Rich people buy their way out. Connected people call in favors. Smart people exploit technicalities. The only people who actually face consequences are those who can't afford to avoid them. So you decided to fix the system through blackmail and violence. I decided to create equality of consequence. Now everyone faces the same risks regardless of their resources. Jason returned to his work on the motorcycle, his movements precise and methodical. The beautiful thing about fear, he said without looking up, is that it's democratic. Rich or poor, connected or isolated, everyone understands the possibility of pain. Derek felt a chill that had nothing to do with the automayor. What happens when you run out of corrupt officials to intimidate? Then I'll have succeeded in creating a deterrent effect. People will choose honesty not because it's right, but because dishonesty carries unacceptable risks. And if they don't, Jason's smile was cold. Then they'll learn that some risks are more than theoretical. The next morning, Derek received a call that Gabriel McFarland had died in his sleep. Natural causes, the doctors said. Complications from his injuries had led to a blood clot. But Derek couldn't shake the feeling that Jason's network of influence extended further than anyone imagined. At Gabriel's funeral, attended by a surprisingly small crowd, Derek watched his son pay respects to the man he'd shot. Jason laid a single white rose on the casket and stood in silence for exactly 60 seconds, his expression unreadable. Closure, Jason said quietly as they walked back to their car. Every story needs an ending. That evening, Derek made a decision that would define the rest of his relationship with his son. He began his own investigation, not into Jason's crimes, but into his capabilities. If his son had become a monster, Derek needed to understand the scope of that transformation. What he found in Jason's room, hidden behind false panels and encrypted on multiple devices, revealed an operation that dwarfed anything Derek had imagined. Jason hadn't just been gathering evidence of local corruption. He'd been building a comprehensive database of leverage material on hundreds of people across multiple states. Politicians, judges, business owners, even fellow students at his high school. Jason had dirt on everyone, categorized by usefulness and threat level. He'd been preparing for this transformation for years, turning himself into a 17-year-old shadow broker with the power to topple governments or destroy lives with a few keystrokes. The most chilling discovery was a file labeled contingencies that contained detailed plans for eliminating threats that couldn't be controlled through conventional means. These weren't theoretical exercises. They were operational blueprints with timelines, resource requirements, and risk assessments. Derek realized that Gabriel's death might not have been natural after all, and that anyone who threatened Jason's operation, including his own father, was living on borrowed time. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. Monica left on a Thursday morning, taking only a suitcase and leaving behind a note that read, "I can't watch what our son is becoming, and I can't stop loving him for it. Don't follow me." She cleaned out their joint savings account and disappeared, leaving Derek alone with the monster he'd helped create. Jason showed no reaction to his mother's departure beyond a mild comment that she'll be safer somewhere else while eating breakfast. The casual dismissal of 15 years of marriage made Derek's blood run cold, but he said nothing. He was learning to choose his battles carefully. The house felt different without Monica's presence. Quieter, more sterile, like a museum of their former family life. Jason maintained his routine, school, homework, his evening projects in the garage, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation, as if he was waiting for something. That something arrived in the form of Mayor Russ Rowe, who appeared at their door on Friday evening looking haggard and desperate. "I need to speak with your boy," Rowe said, not bothering with pleasantries. Derek let him in, curious to see how Jason would handle a direct confrontation. His son emerged from his room, still dressed in school clothes, and greeted the mayor with polite interest. "Mr. Rowe, I wasn't expecting you. Cut the act, kid. I know it was you who leaked my financial records to the State Tax Commission." Jason settled into his father's chair with the confidence of someone much older. "I'm not sure what you mean." "The hell you don't. My accountant found evidence that someone hacked our systems 3 months ago. Professional job, but they left just enough of a trail to trace back to equipment registered to this address." Derek's heart sank. Jason had been sloppy, or more likely, deliberately left evidence that would lead back to him. Another power play, another demonstration that he could act with impunity. "That's a serious accusation," Jason said calmly. "I hope you have evidence to support it. I have enough to destroy you, you little psychopath." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jason's expression didn't change, but Derek could sense something dangerous awakening behind his son's eyes. "Mr. Rowe," Jason said quietly, "I think you should choose your next words very carefully. Are you threatening me? I'm offering advice. Threats are what weak people use when they don't have leverage. I don't need to threaten you." Rowe pulled out his phone, hands shaking slightly. "I've got investigators digging into every aspect of your operation. Financial records, communications, everything. By Monday, you'll be in juvenile detention and your father will be suspended pending investigation." Jason stood up slowly, walking to the window that overlooked their quiet street. "Dad," he said without turning around, "would you mind stepping into the kitchen? Mr. Rowe and I need to discuss some private matters." Every instinct told Derek to stay, to protect his son from whatever consequences were coming. But something in Jason's tone suggested that Rowe was the one who needed protection. From the kitchen, Derek could hear muffled conversation, then silence. After several minutes, Jason called for him to return. He found Mayor Rowe sitting in the same chair, but his entire demeanor had changed. The desperation and anger were gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed expression of a broken man. "Mr. Rowe has decided to withdraw his accusations," Jason said pleasantly. "Haven't you, sir?" Rowe nodded mechanically. "Misunderstanding. Won't happen again. And you'll be resigning from office next week, citing health concerns." Another nod. "Your replacement will be Councilwoman Bertha Hinton, who I'm confident will bring fresh perspectives to municipal government." Rowe stood up unsteadily and walked to the door like a man in a trance. After he left, Derek stared at his son in horror. "What did you do to him?" "I showed him some photographs from his private collection. Turns out the mayor has some very specific recreational interests that wouldn't play well with his voter base." "Blackmail. Leverage. There's a difference." Jason returned to his homework as if nothing had happened. Blackmail is about money or personal gain. Leverage is about ensuring compliance with reasonable behavioral standards. Reasonable according to who? According to me. The simple honesty of that statement was more terrifying than any threat. Jason had appointed himself judge and jury for an entire community, and he saw nothing wrong with that arrangement. Over the weekend, Derek watched his son's operation expand in real time. Phone calls at odd hours, encrypted messages on devices Derek couldn't identify, meetings with people who looked far too old and dangerous to be interacting with a high school student. On Sunday evening, Jason announced that he would be transitioning to a new phase of operations and that Derek should prepare for some significant changes in their living situation. What kind of changes? "We'll be moving to a larger property outside the city limits. More privacy, better security, room for expansion. I like our house. Our house is compromised. Too many people know where we live, and my work requires a more controlled environment." Derek realized that Jason wasn't asking for permission or input. He was announcing a decision that had already been made, and Derek's preferences were irrelevant to the planning process. "What if I refuse to move?" Jason looked up from his laptop, his expression genuinely puzzled. "Why would you do that?" "I'm offering you a chance to be part of something important, something that will reshape how justice works in this country. By terrorizing people into compliance, by creating a system where bad behavior carries guaranteed consequences regardless of wealth, connections, or social status. You spent 20 years trying to achieve that through legal channels. I can accomplish it in 5 through more efficient methods. That night, Derek lay awake trying to decide whether his son was a visionary or a sociopath. The distinction seemed to matter less with each passing day, as Jason's methods consistently produced results that the legal system had failed to achieve. By morning, he'd made a decision that would determine whether he spent the rest of his life as Jason's partner or his victim. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Derek's decision crystallized when he found Jason in the garage at 3 a.m., assembling what appeared to be surveillance equipment while video chatting with someone whose face was obscured on the laptop screen. "Dad," Jason said without looking up from his work, "you're supposed to be asleep. Hard to sleep when your son is running a criminal enterprise out of the family garage." The figure on the laptop spoke in a distorted voice. "Is there a security concern?" "No," Jason replied calmly. "Just a family discussion. I'll contact you tomorrow with the timeline update." The screen went dark, leaving father and son alone among the carefully organized tools and electronics that had become Jason's command center. "Criminal enterprise is a limited way to view what we're building," Jason said, returning to his assembly work. "We're creating accountability infrastructure. People make better choices when they understand the real costs of bad behavior. We, you, me, and our associates. People who understand that traditional justice systems are too slow, too corruptible, and too easily manipulated by wealth and connections." Derek sat heavily on a workbench, studying his son's profile in the harsh fluorescent light. "What happened to you, Jason? When did you become this?" Jason paused, considering the question with the seriousness he applied to everything. "I became this the night you came home from the Marcus trial. Do you remember? 3 years ago, the businessman who killed that family in a drunk driving accident." Derek remembered. Marcus had excellent lawyers who got the charges reduced to reckless endangerment. 18 months in minimum security, out of 9 with good behavior. "You were so angry," Jason continued. "You sat right here in this garage, working on Mom's car, and you said that sometimes the system fails good people because bad people have better resources. That doesn't justify what you've done, doesn't it? Marcus killed 4 people and served 9 months. Gabriel stole evidence and took bribes for years before I shot him. Which outcome served justice better?" The question hung in the air between them, challenging everything Derek had built his career on. "The difference," Derek said finally, "is that Marcus was tried by a jury of his peers and sentenced by a judge following established law. You appointed yourself to both roles and achieved a more just outcome in less time with fewer resources." Jason set down his tools and faced his father directly. "Dad, I respect what you've tried to accomplish, but your methods don't work for people with real power. They buy better lawyers, make better connections, and exploit more loopholes. My methods work for everyone equally. Your methods are illegal. So it was the Underground Railroad. So it was the American Revolution. Sometimes illegal actions serve justice better than legal ones." Derek realized this wasn't a conversation he could win through logic or moral arguments. Jason had constructed a worldview that justified any action in service of his definition of justice, and that worldview was internally consistent enough to resist conventional challenges. "What happens when you're wrong?" Derek asked. "When you destroy someone who doesn't deserve it." "I research extensively before taking action. My error rate is lower than the conventional justice systems." "That's not an answer. It's an evasion." Jason's expression hardened slightly. "Everyone makes mistakes, Dad. The question is whether you learn from them and improve your processes, or whether you use the possibility of error as an excuse for inaction." The next morning, Derek made the phone call that would end his relationship with his son forever. He contacted the FBI, specifically Agent Nellie Nielsen, who specialized in domestic terrorism and organized crime. "I need to report criminal activity," he said when she answered. "What type of criminal activity, Detective Kramer?" "Blackmail, extortion, conspiracy, and possibly murder. The suspect is my 17-year-old son." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds before Agent Nielsen spoke again. "I think we need to meet in person, Detective. This afternoon, away from your home." They met at a coffee shop 20 miles outside the county, where Derek laid out everything he knew about Jason's operation. Agent Nielsen listened without interruption, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification. "This is extensive," she said when he finished. "If even half of what you're telling me is accurate, your son has created one of the most sophisticated criminal networks we've encountered. Can you stop him? We can try. But you understand that testifying against your own son will have consequences beyond the legal system." Derek nodded. "He's not my son anymore. He's someone else wearing my son's face." That evening, Derek returned home to find Jason waiting for him in the living room, laptop open, expression unreadable. "How was your meeting with Agent Nielsen?" Jason asked conversationally. Derek's blood turned to ice. "How did you know about that?" "I know about all your meetings, Dad. I've been monitoring your communications for months. Insurance, you understand. I needed to know if you were becoming a liability." "And am I?" Jason closed the laptop and stood up, his movements deliberate and precise. "That depends entirely on your next choice. You can accept the new reality and become part of something important, or you can continue fighting a war you can't win. What if I choose to fight?" Jason's smile was sad rather than threatening. "Then you'll join Gabriel and Mayor Rowe and all the others who thought they could resist necessary change. I love you, Dad, but I won't let sentiment interfere with progress." Derek looked at his son and saw no trace of the boy he'd raised. Jason had transformed into something alien and dangerous, and there was no pathway back to their former relationship. "I can't be part of this," Derek said quietly. "I know," Jason replied. "That's why I've already made arrangements for your protection." Before Derek could ask what that meant, he heard cars pulling into the driveway. Multiple vehicles, engines running, doors slamming. "FBI," a voice shouted from outside. "Search warrant." Jason remained calm as armed agents surrounded the house. "You've served your purpose, Dad. Thank you for raising me with such clear moral principles, even if you couldn't follow them to their logical conclusion." As agents broke down the front door, Jason activated something on his phone that caused all the electronic equipment in the house to emit a high-pitched whine before going silent. "Evidence destruction," he explained to Derek conversationally as agents flooded into the room. "But don't worry, I've prepared alternative arrangements." Agent Nielsen entered, weapon drawn but not aimed, surveying the scene with professional interest. "Jason Kramer," she announced, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, and interstate commerce violations." Jason offered no resistance as they cuffed him, but his expression suggested amusement rather than defeat. "This isn't over," he told Derek as they led him away. "This is just the beginning of a more efficient phase." Chapter 9. No Forgiveness. The trial lasted 8 weeks and dominated local media coverage. Jason, tried as an adult due to the scope of his crimes, showed no remorse and offered no deals. His defense attorney argued diminished capacity due to age, but Jason overruled him, insisting on representing himself for closing arguments. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Jason said, standing before 12 people whose backgrounds he'd undoubtedly researched, "my father raised me to believe that actions should have consequences, that justice should be blind to wealth and status, and that good people have a responsibility to stop bad people." Derek watched from the gallery, feeling sick as his son turned their family values into a justification for criminal behavior. "I achieved more justice in 18 months than this county's legal system accomplished in the previous decade. Corrupt officials were removed, criminals were prosecuted, and citizens received protections they've been denied for years." Jason's confidence was absolute, his presentation flawless. He spoke like someone convinced that history would vindicate his methods. "The prosecution wants you to focus on my methods rather than my results. They want you to believe that proper procedure matters more than actual justice. I ask you to consider whether my victims deserve protection they never gave their own victims." The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Jason received 25 years without possibility of parole, a sentence that would keep him imprisoned until his mid-40s. He showed no emotion as the sentence was read, but his eyes found Derek in the gallery. "This doesn't end anything, Dad," he said clearly enough for everyone to hear. You can't imprison an idea. 3 months after Jason's conviction, Monica returned home. She looked older, worn down by months of hiding and worrying. They tried to rebuild their marriage, but too much had been destroyed by betrayal and complicity. "I keep thinking about what Jason said," Monica told Derek one evening as they sat in their eerily quiet house. "About creating a system where actions have guaranteed consequences." I'm not defending him, but look around this county. Crime rates have dropped 40% since his arrest. Officials are refusing bribes they would have taken 6 months ago. People are making better choices because they're afraid of who might be watching. Fear isn't justice. No, but it's effective. And sometimes I wonder if Jason was right about traditional systems being too slow to help real victims. Derek filed for divorce the next week. He couldn't live with someone who saw wisdom in their son's methods, even if she wouldn't admit it directly. 2 years later, Derek received his first letter from Jason. It was brief, written in his son's careful handwriting. "Dad, I hope you're well. I want you to know that I don't blame you for testifying against me. You acted according to your principles, just as I acted according to mine. I've been thinking about our last conversation when you said you couldn't be part of what I was building. I understand that now, and I respect your choice. What I hope you'll come to understand is that the work continues even without me. I planted seeds that are growing in ways I never anticipated. People learned lessons from my operation that they're applying in their own communities. The accountability infrastructure is expanding organically, adapting to local conditions and available resources. You may have stopped me, but you couldn't stop the idea that real consequences are possible for everyone, regardless of their position or resources. I hope someday you'll see that as a positive legacy rather than a cautionary tale. Your son, Jason." Derek burned the letter without finishing it. He burned the next 6 letters without opening them at all. 5 years after Jason's conviction, Agent Nielsen contacted Derek about a series of crimes that showed suspicious similarities to his son's methods. Corporate executives found dead under circumstances that suggested suicide, but left evidence of their financial crimes prominently displayed. Politicians who resigned suddenly after anonymous leaks exposed their corruption, a pattern of precision and moral justification that felt familiar. "We think he's running operations from prison," Nielsen told Derek during their meeting. "Recruiting, training, coordinating, building the network he described in his letters. Can you prove it? Not yet, but we're seeing Jason Kramer's methodology in 12 states now. People who take his approach to justice into their own hands, always with the same precision and moral certainty." Derek wasn't surprised. Jason had always been a teacher, someone who shared knowledge and expected others to build on his foundations. Prison had simply given him a more focused audience. "What do you want from me? Help us understand how he thinks. Help us predict what his network might do next." Derek looked at Agent Nielsen, this competent professional who still believed that understanding could lead to control. "You can't stop him," Derek said quietly. "You couldn't stop him when he was 17 and working alone. You certainly can't stop him now that he's had years to refine his methods and recruit like-minded people. So we should just accept that vigilantism is the new normal?" "I don't know what you should accept. I know what I've accepted." Derek stood to leave, ending the conversation, "which is that I raised a monster who believes he's a hero, and that nothing I do will change what he's become. I testified against him. I helped send him to prison, and it didn't matter. He's exactly who he always was, and he'll continue being that person until the day he dies." 10 years after Jason's conviction, Derek lives alone in a small apartment across the state. He worked until mandatory retirement, then moved somewhere his name isn't recognized. He doesn't read news about crime or corruption, doesn't follow political developments, and doesn't think about justice anymore. Sometimes, late at night, he allows himself to remember the boy Jason used to be before the transformation. The child who built elaborate Lego constructions and asked thoughtful questions about fairness and consequences. But those memories feel like artifacts from someone else's life, preserved behind glass and impossible to touch. Monica remarried and moved to Florida. She sends Christmas cards with pictures of her stepchildren Normal kids who play sports and worry about grades instead of institutional reform. Derek throws away the cards without opening them. Jason continues serving his sentence, corresponding with hundreds of people who seek his guidance on implementing accountability measures in their own communities. His letters, when they're intercepted, read like academic papers on justice theory rather than criminal communications. He's become a philosopher of consequences, teaching patience and precision to anyone willing to learn. Derek has never visited his son in prison. He's never responded to the letters that still arrive twice a year. He's never acknowledged the newspaper clippings that Jason sometimes sends, highlighting successful prosecutions of corruption cases that began with anonymous tips. Because Derek Kramer learned something during those terrible months when his family destroyed itself. Some betrayals are too complete for forgiveness, some transformations too fundamental for redemption, and some choices too irreversible for regret. He raised his son to believe in justice, and his son became justice incarnate, ruthless, impartial, and utterly without mercy. That's a legacy Derek will carry to his grave, along with the knowledge that somewhere in a maximum security prison, Jason Kramer is still his father's son in all the ways that matter least and none of the ways that matter most. The boy who said, "I knew you'd come home, Dad," grew up to become someone who ensures that everyone eventually comes home to face the consequences of their choices. And Derek Kramer, who spent his life believing that justice was worth any sacrifice, learned that some sacrifices are too terrible to survive intact. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.